Hi, everybody. I am Kathleen Neal. I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Partnerships at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance, and I have had the honor of co-chairing the Buildings, Infrastructure, and Housing Working Group, along with Michael Stoddard, who's Executive Director of Efficiency Maine Trust. Oh, see, it is. You're right. We had a really terrific multidisciplinary working group with members who represent a bunch of different perspectives on Maine's buildings. We had community advocates and architects and engineers, affordable housing experts, weatherization contractors, organized labor, municipal and state leaders. It went on and on. Thank you all for your insights, your expertise, and your time over the last many, many months. Thanks to all the members of the public who participated, and a special thanks to Molly Siegel, who staffed our working group, and to David Plum, who facilitated. You kept us organized and focused, and for anyone who has worked with me and Michael, you know what a task that is. Our working group was charged with updating and supplementing strategies to modernize Maine's buildings so that the places that we live, work, learn, and gather are safe, comfortable, energy efficient, and resilient to climate change. The strategies and actions outlined in Maine Won't Wait gave us a really good place to start. And our first two recommendations were essentially to keep it up and keep doing better, to continue the exceptional progress that we've made as a state on making homes and businesses more energy efficient with weatherization and clean heating and cooling systems, and also to really level up the impact of increasingly climate-friendly building codes and standards. Our next two recommendations reflect new areas of focus or deeper focus for the working group. We drilled down into specific strategies to promote the manufacture and use of climate-friendly building products, and like many of our fellow working groups, applied an adaptation lens as we explored measures that both reduce carbon and enhance resilience. Our last two recommendations each address a specific sector. Industrial processes represent unique end uses with unique opportunities to accelerate decarbonization. And with publicly funded buildings, we have a unique funding source, our dollars, that presents unique opportunities. So together, these recommendations build on all of our progress and leverage new funding and public engagement, and we can't wait to dig into them. So Michael's going to take the first one.
Thanks, Kathleen. We, as Kathleen mentioned, had a starting point of a pretty robust set of recommendations and targets that were established in the original Climate Action Plan back in 2000. And so we spent a bunch of time in this work group just reviewing what those targets were and what kind of progress we were making. And I think that was helpful, and it really helped direct us to more refined discussion and recommendations for how to go forward, how to improve on what we've already built. A big part of that set of targets was to weatherize 35,000 homes by 2030 and to dramatically accelerate the rate of fuel switching off of high carbon fuels to high efficiency heat pumps running on an electric grid that's getting cleaner and cleaner. So a lot of our discussion was around how are we doing with weatherizing, how are we doing with switching to heat pumps, how are we doing on the equity elements of advancing both of those targets. And there was generally good news to report. We are on track with hitting weatherization targets. We have funding in place that should get us to the 2030 target. There have been some new policies enacted for heat pumps to help fund heat pump programs at the state level that have been really nicely complemented by funding at the federal level. So we're able to do it now in a wide variety of buildings and to have the funds to pay for that. So big progress being made now with low-income and moderate-income households in Maine, switching over to include multifamily buildings where renters live in Maine, getting them switched over to high-efficiency, low-carbon heating systems that are well-insulated. So lots of good things to point to there, and to some degree this is staying the course, but there are areas for improvement going forward. A couple of policies that were noted that we might want to think about going forward is to make sure that to look at policies and make sure they're all pulling in the same direction now that we know that's our target. And so, for example, we noticed that there are sales taxes on the sale of electricity for residential customers, but not on any other heating fuel that you use in the state. Well, why would we have that if our goal is to switch to more people over to electricity? So maybe that's something we should look at. Also, over time, not immediately, but maybe in the future, should we look at emission standards for those heating systems? Should we try to gradually ratchet that up over time? So those were some things we wanted to look at. And I'll jump away and come back.
So we know that adopting and implementing building codes leads to safer, more efficient, and more resilient buildings, and that those benefits compound as building codes become increasingly climate friendly. So that's probably not surprising, but some of the data might be. Compared to the 2015 International Energy Conservation Code, there's an estimate that a home built to the 2021 code will have a life cycle energy savings of almost $24,000 and a statewide emissions impact of almost 400,000 metric tons of CO2. Those savings will just get more and more impressive as we approach net zero building energy codes by 2035. But we do have a ways to go because Maine is still operating with the 2015 code. So we still haven't seen that jump yet to the 2021 code, but we're really optimistic that moving building codes to the new Office of Community Affairs will support more rapid code adoption and more robust training and technical assistance. That is really important because while the building code applies in every community in Maine, not every community has the resources it needs to implement that code. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how to get those resources to the communities that need them to make sure that communities can benefit from the safer and more efficient codes. I also do want to mention that there's a class of buildings that is not subject to Maine's building codes. Manufactured or mobile homes are actually regulated at the federal level. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about how to increase the efficiency and make that segment of our housing, which is an increasingly big chunk of new homes in Maine, as energy efficient as possible. And there's a new federal program that came in with the Inflation Reduction Act to make zero energy ready mobile homes. So we're excited about that.
Another strategy that was identified in Maine Won't Wait was to complement our efforts in buildings with reducing the emissions from those buildings through the heating systems, to also look at the building materials that we use in those buildings, because there's a wide variety and they have different embodied carbon associated with them. There are different types of insulation. For example, we have a manufacturer in the state that makes insulation from wood fiber, and there are ways to take forest products and make materials that are as strong as steel or concrete and can be substituted for them in the right situations. There are some examples of those buildings being put up in Maine now. For example, the USM Student Center and Dormitory used a lot of CLT and other low embodied carbon content materials. So one of the recommendations is to figure out how we can do more of that in Maine, more education about it, more tracking and counting of what is the embodied carbon of the materials we're using. A very good potential starting place is with buildings that are publicly funded, and so that was one of our recommendations.
So So a lot of what we have talked about today, weatherization, building codes, high efficiency heating and cooling, all of those things have resilience benefits. For example, more energy efficient buildings have longer what we call passive survivability. So the amount of time that a building is comfortable in the event of a power outage. This winter storm, this has been a refrain throughout the morning, really highlighted the need to foster greater resilience. And so we talked about basic steps like having flood insurance and some pumps with battery backups, but also more complex and powerful steps to reduce the energy burden and demand on the electric grid through really thoughtful deployment of community and building scale distributed energy resources. There are already there's some interesting overlaps here with the energy working group, and we spent a lot of time talking about that, but not as much time as we're talking about it this morning, so I'm gonna let Michael keep going.
One category of recommendations from Maine Won't Wait that we were pretty light on last time was the industrial sector. Partly that's because factories in Maine had already done a lot of the early, easy work that there is to do in a factory with improved energy efficiency and getting off of heavy fuels onto natural gas was what mostly happened in the 2000s. But what about the next step? So that was part of what we discussed this time around. There are new emerging applications of heat pump technology that can approach temperatures that will provide process steam, and that's what a lot of industrial folks need. And so it's exciting to think about piloting some of those applications in Maine factories, Maine paper mills, and other places like that. Also, membrane filtration is a new technology that's emerging. It appears to be very cost effective and can help displace the use of oil and other heavy fossil fuels in some of those applications. So our thought was, because we have some of those big users in Maine, and because there are new federal programs to help support that, we should concentrate our efforts there.
We should do all of the things that we can do when it comes to the buildings that we're in charge of, right? So the lead by example initiatives at the state level have been really powerful. We want to keep it up, and our working group went deep in 2 categories of publicly funded buildings, the more than 600 school buildings in Maine, and affordable housing. Hannah mentioned that we got to take some really cool field trips, and that included affordable housing that is built to passive house standards. We do know how to do a lot of what needs to be done in Maine's building sector. We know there's a tremendous need. We have the experience, the opportunity, and a lot of new funding available to act on it. The challenge is fitting it all together. So this is a quote from an older Mainer who participated in one of the focus groups from the Mitchell Center, who said, "There's so much information out there. It's so confusing. After reviewing everything, I don't know what I'm eligible for." This is somebody who knows that there's an opportunity. They know there are resources available, and they're still struggling to make sense of it all. Priority populations shared a lot of competing needs that mean that barrier to figuring out how to weave it all together might be enough to keep them from doing it at all. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how to make sure that we're getting these strategies deployed equitably throughout the state. Lots more to say on that, but we're out of time.
Well played.